Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus terms and conditions apply.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, dear listener. As usual, whatever time of the day that you listen to this, and a shout out to our friend who's currently out in Australia doing some work that say that travelling for a couple of weeks. So that's a shout out for you. You know who you are. But welcome to another Dockers Debate episode. It's another preview show. Unfortunately, the Three Bridges game got cancelled, so the preview that we didn't record is in the bin. And we are now with Trev from a Littlehampton point of view. Trev, how are we, mate?
I'm good. Thank you very much for having me on, Michael. Really appreciate it.
Cool, no worries. Well, before we get started, do you know what? We're both fellow podcasters in our own way. Give yourself a little plug. Go on.
Okay. Let's start with one which is my main one, which is my blog, which is www.footballwriting.co.uk, which is a mixture of paid and free subscriptions as well. And I cover games all over the southeast. I don't just keep it to Sussex where I am. I'm actually in Kent quite often, outskirts of London, following my own club Barnet as well. I've got two podcasts I appear on, the Premier Non-League podcast, the PNLP, which has been going for 4.5 years. And just as we mentioned off air, we made it to the Football Content Awards and got silver this year, which is obviously great and nice for the effort that we put in.
We're not bitter. Where's the end pull button? Yeah.
I mean, I must admit that we're up against some podcasts that I knew very well that
Thank you.
That I've listened to a few times. I've actually been on a few, and this is obviously now another one as well. So obviously, that's extending my bows as well. And recently just launched the SNLF, which is the Sussex Non-League Football website, which we've now attached a podcast to as well. So we tackle all things Sussex from step 2 right down to step 6.
Yeah, there we are. So quite the encyclopedia, if you will, Trev.
Quite busy.
Yeah, I think off air we'll talk about networking. We'll go from there, see how we can get on. But I'm always, as usual, joined with Rob on these preview shows. But yeah, let's just get straight into the crux of it, really. Trev, I mean, you, as we say, you're from the Littlehampton way. You cover Littlehampton. Bit similar to the Dockers. It's been an eventful season, but unfortunately for the wrong reasons for Littlehampton.
Yeah, it has been. They can't seem to escape from that bottom 6 at the moment. And it's pretty much a similar story to last year. And the players they signed across the summer this year looked, with no disrespect to the players of last year, a lot better standard than what they had, which I think has helped a little bit with having a bit of a budget, at least this year, whereas the previous 2 years of them coming up, they spent the money on the ground to obviously keep them in the division at step 4. Whereas yourselves, I know a little bit about actually coming from Kent and spending time up there. I was at the playoff semi-final against Glebe, which was obviously a fantastic turnaround for you guys to get through and make it to the final. And although I've lived in Sussex for 17 years, Kent was where I was born and bred, so I keep an eye on everything that goes on up there as well. So where you've got an Isthmian South East division that's predominantly Kent and Sussex, there aren't many other teams I'm not looking out for.
That's good. I mean, like you say, you're currently hovering just above the drop zone. And I looked at the form and it's like 5 wins and a draw out your last 6. So what do you think's going wrong at the moment? And how do you think you turn it round?
I think when you look at it, they don't have a problem scoring goals. They've got some great goal scorers. They've just lost Robbo Toole, who's gone back to Whitehawk in the last couple of weeks. Joe Ben has just recently returned, who hit 60 goals in the season they won the treble and got to the Vase final at Wembley. He's been out with a horrendous catalogue of injuries and illness, and having someone like that back in your team at that level that can score goals, you shouldn't have any trouble finding the net. The joint player manager, George Gaskin as well, who's well known around Sussex for goals everywhere he's been, and being a Littlehampton boy, he's come back to manage the team with Mitch as well. And another player that knows where the net is. They just don't have any problems scoring goals. At the back end, their back four seems to change week on week. A couple of times I've been to games two in a row, and the back four's been different the second week than it was to the first week. So it must be that little bit of difficulty to try and get some cohesion, especially between a goalkeeper and a back four. When you know that, especially at this level where teams have only got the players for maybe a couple of hours on a Tuesday if they haven't got a game, or a couple of hours on a Thursday, and you've got to try and get that cohesion together with a different back four each week. It can't be easy.
Yeah, and you mentioned that like you've got two managers. It's George Gaskin and Mitchell Hand, is it?
Yeah.
So, and you've also got an assistant manager, Steve Tabor. So,
yeah.
I mean, how's that working? Because I've always been in the opinion that two managers will eventually be problematic, because as a club, you need someone to blame when it goes wrong. You need that one person. But there's always a balance of the egos, and there's always who is actually running the show, making the decisions, who's the support, how do you split the duties and so on. So I've never been a fan of having two managers, but how do you think that's working with them?
Between the pair of those two, brilliantly. Mitch has not played for the last 3 years, I think, since they got promoted. His last game was, as far as I know, was in the last cup final they played after the Wembley game, which gave them their treble. And so George is the one that's actually on the pitch, and rarely is he sitting on the sidelines where they've had Rob O'Toole and a couple of other strikers as well. George has actually been on the substitutes bench, and we actually had Mitch on our podcast on the SNLF earlier in the year. And I mean, I've known both Mitch and George for quite a number of years as well. And Mitch said that this year, actually, something George wanted to do a little bit more of was actually move towards being on the sideline, because he feels that Mitch is having all the pressure and shouldering a lot of that, whereas George obviously gets onto the pitch and plays as well. But I guess as well, having having one of your managers on the pitch as well is almost like having a second captain as well. And I guess you get that different dynamic that you see as well from being on the pitch and not just on the sideline, as it goes. But I think between the pair of them, they're great mates, have been for many years, and it does work really well. And I've seen it in a lot of cases, like you say, Rob, it doesn't work out always everywhere you go. We had a couple of guys on our podcast just last week, actually, who were joint managers, and you could see there is a dynamic between the pair of them where it just seems to work. Not 100% it does everywhere, and it does normally end up with one going one way and one going the other. But I think these two do complement each other quite well.
You were just saying there a minute ago about, there's an issue with the score and with the conceding goals more than the scoring. And looking at the league table just quickly, I mean, I was just having a little look there as you were saying it. It's actually, is it a false position in the sense that if you look at the goal differences, Hive in fourth from bottom, one below, minus 33 goal difference, Lancing minus 22, Stayning Town minus 27, Phoenix minus 33. Littlehampton, who are just outside, are on minus 9. And as we know in football, that's like a point in itself, really. And then you look at kind of Herne Bay, 2 places above, minus 18. Is it? Let's be honest. Let's not try and get say too many inside information. But is it a case of there's a little bit of panic setting in halfway through the season, or is it just like you say, look, just tighten up at the back, we'll be all right?
I think it's a little bit of the tighten up thing. I mean, if you go back just about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think they went consecutive games where they were 2-0 up and let the 2-0 lead slip and ended up with a draw out of the game. And there just isn't that problem with the scoring goals. It's just trying to keep them out at the other end. And I mean, I think I've watched them 5 or 6 times this season in total since August, and it's that centre back pairing that seems to change as well. You can probably cope with the two fullbacks changing from time to time, but that spine of the team as well, the goalkeepers change quite often. It's been Mac Chisholm for the last few games that I've seen, whereas the start of the season, James Binfield was in, a player that's been well known as well to a lot of their players, even if they've been away from the club and come back, because he starred in that Vars run and the few years before as well. So I just think it's that where where that spine of the team lacks through the middle is where, it tends to come from. A lot of the goals I've seen conceded seem to come from out wide and those balls into the box. And I think where that defensive partnership in the centre and the goalkeeper is not quite as strong as it was perhaps earlier in the season when Binfield was playing, and into last year as well. I think that is just the difference.
Do you think as well? I mean, even though we're an Erith Town podcast, you try to be respectful of other sides, and Erith Town, and there's times where they've been absolute garbage, and we've been honest and said they've not played very well. But a lot of the teams who are down there now in that bottom three, bottom four, they've been down there for quite a while. Like Phoenix and Steyning and Lancing, those kind of teams. Again, do you think, even though yes they are down there, and it could be a case of tightening up at the back, do you think there's a massive gulf of difference between the two, or like we said, it is a false position?
I think so. I've watched Denning and I've watched Lancing this year as well, and obviously Lancing changed their manager a few weeks ago and have had a tiny little bounce. And I know they've had played a couple of the tougher sides, but you can see that difference in the quality that Littlehampton have got, which I think is what they went after in the summer compared to what they had in previous years as well. And I suppose compared to last year, they are slightly more solid if you compare it in terms of goal difference. They did get beaten a few times last year, and I just think that the quality they've got this year compared to last year, they should be probably a 2 or 3 places higher. And those, going back to those 2 games a couple of weeks ago where they let 2 goal leads slip twice in 2 games, that's another 4 points they should have on the board. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, they're looking a little bit brighter when they're looking down at the likes of Hythe and Stenning and Lancing. And I mean, with Three Bridges heading back home next week, having played at Chatham as well, that's going to make a huge difference to them. And they've just found a little bit of form actually just as they're leaving Belleville. So I think, Littlehampton have got to be just wary of that, but knowing that, they can control it themselves.
From what you're saying, you're not having troubles, because looking at your scores, you've lost games like 4-3 and 3-2, and so you are scoring goals. You are definitely scoring goals. You're just letting in on occasion one more than you're scoring, which is obviously the wrong way around. That's not the way you want it. And I think if there's a lot of new players, it's going to take time to gel. Especially as a defence and a goalkeeper, it's going to take time. But you've got to back yourself. I know there's still a long way to go, but as things stand, you have to back yourself to be able to push on and move a bit further up the table, surely.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I say Mitch and George as a partnership together, and along with Steve as well, they're very studious in the way they put the game together, the way they put their sessions together before the game. And I think, but as you say rightly, Rob, having so many new players last year has actually possibly hindered just a little bit. And I know they've suffered since they've gone into the Isthmian League of players just being able to attract those that do want to do the extra travelling, especially when you get Ramsgate or Herne Bay Hythe away on a Tuesday night from Littlehampton is a fair distance. And
I know all about that.
Yeah.
Well, do you know what? Just funny for you said it. Just quickly to interject. I remember when I saw the fixture list, because obviously we travel, and it was like, Sheppey away on a Tuesday, and I was like, who've done that? And they went, it's one of the more local ones. I'm like, what, a 50-minute drive?
Yeah,
and the road's a local one. But sorry, Trev.
Yeah, no, I mean, and that can't be helped. But I think quite a few of players when they've stepped up, especially from Sussex, from step 5 to 4, they do find that extra travelling so much more prohibitive, and a lot of them drop down within a couple of months. And I think as well, a few of them were prepared to give it a go when they first stepped up a couple of years ago, and a couple of them have been back and tried it again. But just ultimately that, I think, is just a lot of a commitment. So they're trying to sign players that are used to that travelling as well, and trying to get them to drop down a level or 2 as well. And like you say, getting them to gel a little bit is difficult. But when I look through the games I've watched them this year as well, the team is so different every time as well. There's at least probably 2, 3, maybe 4 players that didn't play, in the previous game, and that might only have been a week or 2 before. And again, you just can't get that consistency and gelling where people understand each other's games. And that might be just what's costing them just those few extra points, to get up the table.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've spoken about goals. You said you lost Robbo at all?
Yeah.
Which must be a bit of a shame. But you've got Jordan Layton, you've got Lang, you've got Ben, you've got Faber.
No, Alex left actually quite a few months ago. Yeah, he went to Leatherhead and he's now at Lancing.
Do your research,
Well,
Rob,
you've
for
obviously
goodness
got your
sake.
danger men. I was going to say, is there anyone else there within the team who you think's a bit special, but that Dockers fans should know about, keep their eye on for Saturday's game?
There is a young lad that plays right back. I can't remember what his second name is. His first name's Ryan. He's actually out injured at the moment. I'm not sure if he'll be fit for Saturday. He's a flying, pacey young lad who's very good at getting down the wings and getting the ball into the box. Again, it would depend on what Mitch and George have got available to him. Yeah, I mean, I think Saturday they only fielded 3 substitutes at home to Margate. So they'd lost Rob back to Whitehawk. And I always find a little bit of a concern when teams are starting to field 4s and 3s on the bench and not a 5, and you think, why? Why is that? Is it just a case of you've not got enough players signed? There is just an injury crisis at the moment. They don't have an under 23s, like I know yourselves do. There actually aren't. A lot of the top level sides down here haven't got 23s. So if they are struggling with injuries, they've got to go out and sign another player. And also, they've got the likes of, quite locally, Bognor at step 3, Chichester went up to step 3, which are their 2 most local. They have got a good relationship with Worthing from the National League, so they do have some of their youngsters occasionally on loan for a time, and that did serve them really well last year. So whether they'll go back down that route again just to plug the gaps for the time being, they are a little short on options.
With regards to this weekend's game, like we've made the Stanmore a bit of a fortress over the last couple of seasons. We've got, as I said before on the podcast, we've got like quite a uniqueness, and I know a lot of non-league clubs would say that, but there is that thing about Erith Town that is quite unique. How can you see it going? Because I think the thing is that what we were saying, and I think the East Grinstead game proved it with Erith when we travelled there. If you get a good run on your day, you'll beat anyone. And I even think that with teams near the bottom of the table, Ramsgate were riding a crest of a wave recently, and then they lost, miraculously. How can you see the game going?
I think there's going to be a lot of goals in it. I could see it that way. And you could see something like a 4-3 or a 5-4. It very much depends if Littlehampton can get 11 out and 5 on the bench as well, so they've got some options. Whether they can replace Rob in time or whether they're going to go with Joe and George up front. They've got Kieran Pammont, who plays in just behind, who's played for Horsham and Worthing at step 3 as well, who knows where the net is, who's a nice tidy little player. So they've still got a few options, but I watched you guys twice last year in the cup final against Corinthian as well as the playoff semi-final. So I know you've got match winners and you've got goals in your team as well. It would be a tough one to call if it goes, and knowing that Littlehampton are capable of grabbing a 2-0 lead and letting it slip as well. Goals have got to be in there, surely. Really have.
So basically, it's got 6 all written all over it.
Do you know what? If I read that in the non-league paper on Sunday morning or on Twitter on Saturday night, I'll be like, fantastic! Look at that.
Yeah, well, we've had madder scores this season. I was looking at your tendencies seem to hover around the 180 to 200 mark or thereabout. Yeah. Are they good travellers? Do you bring many people with you when they go away?
I know they had a bit of a problem a few years ago, and I'm sure they won't mind me saying as well, especially during the Vars run, where there were a few characters that attached themselves to the club that didn't paint them in very good glory. They did end up getting banned from the sports field, but obviously you can't stop them travelling to away games. So I know they had a bit of a problem, I think a year or so ago, where those were travelling to games, but I think that seems to have
come to Erith. No, I'm joking.
Well, or it's come to an end, thankfully. I think being a bit of a travel although it's a Saturday, but Saturday before Christmas as well, you'll get a few. I don't think generally too many. The games I've seen around Sussex where they've travelled away, you're probably talking maybe 20 to 50. Very much all depends on the night and the day and everything like that. But I mean, the home attendances have not been too bad. When I went against Sittingbourne a couple of Tuesdays ago, it was bitterly cold. And I was expecting it to be somewhere around about 120, 150. And I think it was around about the 180, 200 mark. So it's a slight shame because the crowds were really good during that period where they had the run to Wembley, not just for the Vars game itself, for the league games. And they started off a little bit like similar when they got the promotion, but they've tailed off because people jump on a bandwagon, don't they, when teams win, as we very well know. And then when it drops off a little bit, they dropped off. But to be fair, I think they're average. When I look around clubs sort of around their level that I think they should be getting at, they were probably about right. And when you look at some of the Isthmian North clubs on less than 100 through the gate, you think at least 180 to 200 is paying some bills at least. Yeah,
I don't know. I mean, there must be a few other clubs around abouts as well where you are, because quite a lot down there on the coast, isn't there?
Yeah. I mean, I've said, I moved down here 17 years ago, and where I was at the time in Wick, which is just like a little village just outside Littlehampton, I think there's something like about 6 to 8 clubs in a 5-mile radius from step 3 to step 7. So you've got so many clubs really, really trying to compete for players. And unless you've got a pound note or two extra than the team down the road, it's quite a struggle to attract players. Really is.
It's also from the point of view of like trying to get kids in and all that kind of stuff. Like you're competing not just against the PlayStation and Netflix and everything else, but if there's 6 or 7 other clubs they can choose from, they're going to go to the one that's scoring the goals and getting the results. So, if you go for a sticky patch, everyone will just go, well, I'll go that one up there now. So there's that as well, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, they have got a very good youth setup, which I think only the last 2 or 3 years have they really realised that they need to invest in that a little bit more in terms of bringing them through as well. I mean, the summer months are great. They've got plenty of green grass area. If you've ever been to the sports field, they've got the cricket pitch that joins the football pitch as well. So you've got kids playing football while the game's going on and everything, but and they're all wearing Littlehampton kits and everything like that. So there is a little bit of a pathway. They know they need to do that little bit extra with the 18s and try and get a 23. So they've got that pathway through, because there are 2 or 3 clubs underneath them down at step 5 and 6 that have got that pathway through that can get a child, all the way through. Whereas at the moment it kind of starts a little bit. And I think that would help a little bit where you've got a few more local players that people can identify with as well, and that sort of thing. Whereas at the moment, you're signing players and bringing players in. A lot of them are not Littlehampton based. They might only be Worthing or Bognor, just the other side. But, a lot these days, people want to identify, something with the badge.
That's true. Well, I don't have anything else to say except to have, good luck on Saturday, but not that much luck. It is our Christmas fixture. There will be Santa. There will be, gifts for kids, all that kind of good stuff. So anyone who does turn up can make a day of it and have some fun. Anything left to ask, Michael?
What's your score prediction, Trev?
Right, I'm going to go 5-4, but I have no idea which way it's going to go. I really don't. Honestly,
5-4 to someone.
Yeah, 5-4 to someone. I just fancy there being goals in there because, I think both sides have got the ability to do that. I think possibly you've got the better chance of actually keeping goals out, and that's no disrespect to Littlehampton at all. But I don't know, maybe they might surprise me on the day and keep a clean sheet. Who knows?
Okay.
It's got 0-0 written all over it.
No, I'm going for another 7-4.
7-4. That would be a cracker, especially someone 4-1 up.
Yeah, I'll go for a 3-1 home win.
Nice one. All right, guys. Thanks a lot, Trev. That's this Dockers preview for this week, and hope everyone enjoyed that. And we'll speak to you again soon.
podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.